Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Carl Fitzpatrick.
Well, economist Jim Power has recently authored a report about the opportunities for Irish businesses in Arab countries. Jim joins us now to discuss these opportunities and why they're important for Irish businesses, particularly in the face of growing uncertainty in the US market. Jim, we will be discussing a report which you have authored which highlights the growth potential for Irish businesses in the Arab world. But first, what is your broad assessment of the Irish economy right now and where it might be heading over the next 12 months?
Thank you very much, Carl. Well, the Irish economy is actually, performing quite strongly on a number of metrics. The labour market still very strong, a 4.1% unemployment rate, a record level of employment of 2.77 million at the end of last year. The export performance has recovered very strongly after a setback in 2023, albeit I would say in the first 3 months of this year, it is exaggerated by a lot of front loading to the United States in the chemical and pharma sector, and that was ahead, obviously, of possible tariffs. So in general, it's still an economy that is showing pretty decent levels of momentum. I guess the one area of the economy I would have had concern about for some time would be the SME sector. And 99.8% of businesses in Ireland employ less than 250 people. And for those SMEs who are exposed to the Irish consumer sector, it is a more challenging environment because, consumers have seen a significant increase in the cost of living over the last 3 or 4 years. So there is pressure there. But also a lot of the cost inputs for the SMEs have increased dramatically in recent times. You talk about labour costs, you talk about energy, insurance, all of those costs of doing business, regulation, of course. So it's a challenging enough environment for the SME sector. But in overall terms, I would say at this point in time, Ireland is in a reasonably good position. However, looking forward, there is deep cause for concern. And that deep cause for concern emanates from what's happening in the United States. We've seen what Trump has been doing and proposing and backing off from in terms of tariffs. There's the possibility that he will instigate significant changes to the U.S. corporation tax code. So all of these things do threaten the U.S. multinational sector in the Irish economy. And I guess this has been one of my key themes in relation to the Irish economy, concentration risk. 10 companies account for 52% of corporation tax. Those are 10 U.S. multinationals. So we have this massive dependence on the U.S. multinational sector.
And in terms of improving our national competitiveness, what areas should the government be prioritising?
Just the general environment for cost of doing business, has deteriorated significantly in recent times. But I do think we need to take a long-term perspective on this. What's important to the proper functioning of the Irish economy? What's important for the development of indigenous companies and also, the continued presence of the multinational sector in the country? Well, I think it's obvious that there are serious deficiencies in the energy sector. Ireland is consistently on a knife edge in relation to energy. I think the whole renewable energy agenda particularly needs to be pushed in a dramatic way at this juncture. We've dragged our feet for too long. Secondly, investment in water infrastructure, because, the water system, particularly here in Dublin where I am, it too is on a knife edge. That's absolutely essential to get the water infrastructure correct. Housing is obviously a huge issue in my view because housing is normally seen as a sort of a social good, but from an economic perspective, housing is an incredibly important area of competitiveness because if you are a company coming into Ireland to set up or to expand, or if you're any company indeed deciding to locate in a particular part of Ireland, the availability and affordability of housing either to buy or to rent is incredibly important for your workforce. We have a significant challenge there at the moment. And I think the fourth area where significant investment is required is in terms of the education system, because at the end of the day, the one thing that has and will continue to, play a key role in differentiating Ireland is the quality of the workforce. And of course, the investment in quality education is an important part of that.
I would like to talk to you next about the recent report that you authored about the opportunities for Irish businesses in Arab countries. Jim, who commissioned this report and why?
The Arab-Irish Chamber of Commerce commissioned this report. It's actually a follow-on from a report I did back in 2019, 2020, just as Brexit was really starting to kick in. So this is a follow-up on this. The Arab-Irish Chamber obviously is trying and consistently tries to build up the relationship, the economic and the social relationship between Ireland and the Arab world. I looked at 22 different countries in the Arab world and broke down our trade exposure, etc., with those countries. But I guess the real reason why a report like this lands well at the moment is that concentration risk I identified. It's clear the US has been incredibly important for Ireland, but that is now under significant threat. So we need to try and diversify our external economic relationships. And, I've looked at Canada as one possibility. I'm now looking at the Arab world as well. As I say, there's 22 countries, massive population growth there, 488 million population in the 22 countries I analysed. And over the next 30 years, the United Nations projects that population is going to grow by 52 to 53%. So it's a huge market. It's a rapidly growing market. And it is a market that Ireland has very little penetration in at the moment. And I think another point about the Arab world is that roughly 90% of what they consume, they have to import. So there has to be a major opportunity there for Irish companies to work with Enterprise Ireland, to work with the IDA and others, or BIA, Fáilte Ireland, to try and build up that economic relationship.
Well, if you've just tuned in, I'm speaking to economist Jim Power. Jim, talk to us about the factors which have contributed to growth in the Arab countries.
Growing population has been very important. Obviously, oil has been a very important driver of those economies for many years. But those countries now recognise, that the future of oil isn't at all certain at this stage. So they are also trying to diversify their economic models. We've seen massive investment in infrastructure. We've seen massive investment in education and so on. So basically, the Arab world, having been so dependent on oil, is trying to pivot, and it's going into many other different sectors. But all of the investment that is required does necessitate a significant importation of goods and services from other parts of the world. So we've seen, for example, a number of Irish construction companies go into the Arab world to engage in significant infrastructure investment. So it is basically a story of a region that is growing dramatically in population terms, but it's wealthy, and it is trying to pivot its economic model. So all of these factors are driving that region in a significant way. And if you look, for example, the International Monetary Fund, forecasting growth out to 2030 in a number of different economies. And I would caveat this by saying that forecasting the future is incredibly challenging and uncertain. But the view from the IMF would be that the Arab world offers the greatest potential for stronger growth in the global economy for the next 5 or 6 years at least.
Jim, you referenced the construction sector opportunities, but what other sectors should be looking at the Arab countries right now?
At the moment, there is a concentration as well. We export a lot of chemical and pharmaceutical products, essential oils, perfumes, toiletries. They'd be two major categories. But I would see building a stronger relationship in the food and dairy sector, very important. The equine industry, healthcare, selling healthcare services, particularly medtech. I think agricultural advice and training, construction, education, renewable energy, basically the whole infrastructure development, aviation, aircraft leasing, and so on, tourism and other professional services. So I think it's a broad range of sectors that would have significant potential to expand business into that part of the world. And of course, these are all sectors that are already very important to the Irish economy. So the ability to grow those in a rapidly growing market, I think, has to be significant.
And as you referenced, there's 22 countries in the Arab world. So which country should Irish businesses be looking to first?
Well, the main ones with the biggest populations, the most rapid growth, and I guess the most stable political backdrop would be countries like Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Oman, Qatar, Egypt, Morocco. They're big markets. And if you look, for example, you talk about Morocco, if you look at the expansion that Ryanair has had into Morocco in recent years, they're increasing the number of destinations they're flying into on an annual basis at this stage. So it's those countries offer, they're the biggest, they're the most rapidly growing. As I say, they are the most politically stable. But that shouldn't divert us away from, there are a lot of other countries in there as well that are growing rapidly. But they're the ones, as a starting point, in my view, that stand out.
And are there any specific protocols or procedures that Irish businesses need to be aware of when it comes to doing business in the Arab world?
In the Arab world particularly, one of the most important things to do from the word go is to try and build up a relationship, to build up trust, to build up confidence in each other. And as part of that, you need to understand the cultural and indeed business attributes of that part of the world. The work week, for example, many Arab countries do not work on Fridays. Face-to-face engagement and holding as many meetings as possible to build up trust and a solid relationship is important. You need to respect the language. You need to be flexible. And I think most important of all, it requires massive hard work, dedication and patience. And of course, then there's the other cultural norms like dress code and so on. So it's a question of understanding the cultural and business attributes of those countries and working hard to make sure you can build up that relationship of trust. But it is long term. It does require a lot of patience. And if you talk to any of the businesses which I have done, which are doing well in the Arab world, it didn't happen overnight. It took a lot of investment to get there. But they would tell you it's well worth it because it's rapidly growing.
And from speaking to many businesses on this programme over the years about doing business in the Arab world, some of them have told me about the requirement for a local sponsor or partner. Is that still the case out there?
Yeah, I think it generally is. It's important to have a local sponsor, local partner out there. That helps build the whole trust thing, and it gives you a foothold into the market. But it's difficult again. It's hard work, but I think that sort of investment actually would pay off. And I think particularly, as I stressed at the beginning of the interview, in the context of a US trading relationship that is pivoting in a pretty dramatic way at the moment. And, who knows where Trump is eventually going to land on all of this stuff. But if the US is no longer a trusted partner, we've got to build other partners around the world. And I think even before Trump was elected, I think this necessity to diversify our economic model internationally was very important.
Of course, when it comes to contracts and legal frameworks, how does the law work over there? Because I know in the Gulf, Sharia law influences a lot of the commercial law.
Understanding the legal framework, making sure you get good partners on the ground that will help you navigate the different legal systems. That's really important. But, it's no different than building economic relationship with Japan, China, wherever, that there are always attributes of the local legal system and so on that are different, and we need to understand those. Enterprise Ireland actually is providing massive assistance out there to Irish companies that are trying to expand. But I would never, ever suggest that this is easy. It's not easy. It does require a lot of hard work. It does require a lot of understanding. As you say, the legal system is obviously a key part of that as well.
The Arab world is known for its relationship-driven culture, as you alluded to. On the basis of that, Jim, do you think that there's a need for the business owner in Ireland to travel out there and develop those personal relationships and trust on the ground?
Oh, absolutely. The only way to do it is to get out there, get on the ground, meet the people, they really do value the face-to-face relationship, and they also really do appreciate that people would come from countries like Ireland to actually sit down and meet them and talk to them. So it's that building the relationship piece that is incredibly important. But I to be honest, I think if you want to build a business in any country in the world, getting out there face-to-face is the only way to do it.
And Jim, how can the Arab-Irish Chamber of Commerce be of benefit and assistance to Irish businesses that want to explore those opportunities in the Arab world?
Well, the Arab-Irish world is basically in the business of helping Irish companies understand the environment in which they're trying to get into. So it's helping areas like the legal system, getting contracts in place, establishing the relationships. So really the Arab-Irish Chamber, it's a conduit for building that relationship, and that they're incredibly proactive. They're incredibly positive about this. And I think their success rate has been significant, but there's a long way to go.
And Jim, finally, you mentioned earlier about other markets, including Canada being a potential opportunity also for Irish businesses to look to. Where are the opportunities for Irish businesses in the Canadian market?
Well, I visited Canada a couple of years ago and did a series of presentations around the country, talking about what's happening in Ireland, trying to, help build that economic relationship. I think in areas like professional services, that's important. Food, beverage is important. I think the tourism potential from Canada is absolutely enormous. Indeed, the tourism potential in both directions, because this can't be just a one-sided relationship. I think the chemical and pharma is also important in the Canadian market. So I guess just like the Arab world, the Canadian world, many of the same sectors, there's great potential for growing in that market. And I guess Canada would be easier because, okay, they speak two languages, but, English is one of the two languages. So that gives a major advantage. And secondly, Canada has a huge cultural affinity with Ireland because of the Irish emigration to Canada over the centuries, actually. And that's one thing that did strike me about Canada. I didn't quite realise that cultural relationship with that country was so strong. We always talk about the cultural affinity with the United States, but, it's equally strong in Canada.
Well, if you've just tuned in, that was economist Jim Power, and I'd like to thank Jim, as always, for sharing his insightful analysis with us this morning.
Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Carl Fitzpatrick.